Services are suspended and Great Western Railway trains are terminating early at Reading. Also, because of the snow, South East and Greater Anglia are running a reduced service, but Greater Anglia trains can't run between Ware and Hertford East because of the overhead wire problem. Most airports are reporting delays and disruption because of the bad weather. On the Underground, the Northern Line's not running from Golders Green to Edgware, and the Met Line suspended Wembley Park to Aldgate. And on the roads, very slow on the M40 southbound, Junction 3 at Loudwater because of an accident. And there's been an accident on the M25 anti-clockwise between junctions 24 at Potters Bar and 23 at South Mims, so one lane is closed. LBC Travel, your next updates in 15 minutes. I'm Joanne Webb.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
Good morning, it's 10:04 on the 1st of March. This is Sadiq Khan bringing you your latest edition of Speak to Sadiq on LBC. I'm here for the next 30 minutes or so taking your calls. This is your chance to put any question you like to me, the Mayor of London, and I'll do my best to answer. So the numbers for you to get your questions on the air are 0345 6060973. You can email on sadiq@lbc.co.uk or you can text on 84850. And don't forget, you can also watch Speak to Sadiq on the website lbc.co.uk or live on the LBC Facebook page. Let's ignore James O'Brien and go to the first call. It's Phil in Barnet. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning, Sadiq.
Hi Phil.
Hi. The customs union that Jeremy's actually embraced and supports. As a Leave Labour voter, I totally support him in what he's actually done and what he's actually proposed, I should say. I like the idea that being a member of the customs union not only helps business to provide clarity and direction, supported by the CBI, the Institute of Directors and the TUC, as you well know. But my concern is I support the customs union, staying within it, but I'm slightly anxious about your position in terms of the single market. How far are you prepared to go in terms of endorsing the single market? I mean, I personally, as a Leave voter, like elements of the European Union. I support many things that they've done, particularly workers' rights and so on. But in terms of the single market, my anxiety, and many friends around me, true Labour voters, I'm not talking about people who are phoning up, attending from Conservative Central Office saying they'd never vote Labour.
Question, please.
The question is simply, in terms of the single market, how far are you prepared to go? Do you support the free movement of people? I support the free movement of workers, but not people. Will you endorse that? Are you supportive of that?
Well, look, Phil, let me do your question. I support fully the speech made by Jeremy Corbyn in relation to the customs union. And just to remind...
It wasn't the customs union, was it, Mr. Mayor? It was a customs union. A customs
union, which is practically the same thing as the customs union, except we're outside the EU, clearly, if we've left the European Union, so it can't be the customs union. So look, let me just remind other listeners, Phil, who aren't experts like you, in relation to the reason why Jeremy has said what he has said. What we can't do when we leave the European Union is have a position where we're losing jobs, companies are leaving our country, and it's leading to people being poorer in this country. So the circle that Jeremy's trying to square is, after we've left the European Union, how we can ensure businesses aren't doing less well and jobs aren't being lost. And the way to do that is to recognise that actually a lot of business is done by our country and our businesses with the European Union. Roughly speaking, half of all the trade done is with the European Union. So what Jeremy's announced is a number of things. Number one, there should be a transitional deal for as long as possible. During that transitional period, we should be members of the single market and customs union. 2, we've got to make sure we don't have an extreme hard Brexit. 3, there should be a meaningful vote from MPs and those in Parliament in relation to the final deal the government does. But also, more importantly, this week, Jeremy reconfirmed we should be guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens who contribute to our city and our country being so successful. So the speech from Jeremy is welcome. What he has said is, should we leave the European Union, we should be in a customs union. You're right. My view is that actually I'd like us to stay in the single market. What Jeremy has said is he thinks we should be as close as possible to a single market. And the concern Jeremy has is the one you've articulated, Phil, which is the concern that people had around the free movement of people. And all I'd say is this. Actually, the European Union doesn't say there should be unfettered free movement of people. Within the European Union treaties, there is provision, for example, if people come here and don't exercise their treaty rights, don't work, for example, within 3 months, some countries do remove them and have directions to do so. And the point I'd make is it is possible to negotiate with our European partners a deal that means that we can square the circle.
Why weren't you saying that before the referendum? Why were so few Remain campaigners either ignorant of or silent about the fact that the rules were perfectly in place to have more controlled immigration?
I think one of the things the previous...
Did you know?
Yeah, I did. And one of the things that David Cameron tried to do is try to say negotiated some changes with the European Union, the issue in relation to benefits, the issue in relation to other changes. And actually, when you speak to Donald Tusk and others in the European Union, they say they would have given Prime Minister Cameron much more. And you'll have read the book, I'm sure, in relation to David Cameron selling us short in relation to what could have been negotiated with the EU. It's quite clear that the EU is willing to negotiate in relation to free movement of people.
And Tony Blair's speech later today, he's expected to say something along the lines of let them make some concessions now to let us stay.
But people are poo-pooing what Tony Blair and John Major are saying. It's worth reminding ourselves, John Major was the Prime Minister when Maastricht was negotiated, Tony Blair the Prime Minister when Lisbon was negotiated. They do know a bit what they're talking about, and so we should listen when they talk about the progress that can be made with the European Union.
You're being disingenuous, though, in the context of the customs union, and I'm not on first-name terms with the leader of the Labour Party. I'll continue to call him Mr Corbyn, because what he promised was really just a question of tacking within Theresa May. It's undeliverable, this notion of a customs union, free and frictionless trade without observing the four freedoms of the single market. You know that. You can cite Norway as an example, but Norway's in Schengen.
Well, can I say, look, I don't wish to be disparaging about Norway, Switzerland, Turkey, Canada, but we aren't any of those countries. We're the sixth biggest economy in the world, and I think it is possible for us to negotiate a bespoke deal with the European Union. I think what's encouraging...
But they keep saying that it isn't. Donald Tusk today is saying you cannot have free and frictionless trade unless you are in a customs union.
And that's why Jeremy Corbyn is saying we should be in a customs union.
But you can't be in a customs union and not obey the four freedoms, really. No country does.
Well, no. What I think Donald Tusk is saying is you can't have it both ways, which is the impression Boris Johnson and Theresa May are trying to give in relation to being outside a customs union, but having no hard border, for example, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The point Jeremy Corbyn is making, which I support fully, is what we should be seeking to do, and it's a pro-business case, by the way, is to have a customs union with the European Union, which should be as close as possible to the current customs union. And the way I describe it is, it's like a joint venture. There'd be examples where the European Union with Britain would be negotiating with third countries, it could be the USA or others, and they would be taking on board our concerns and our wishes when it comes to us negotiating a joint venture with a third country.
Theresa May expressing grave rejection of what Barnier announced yesterday with regard to that border, and yet anyone who's followed these events closely, as you'd expect the Prime Minister to have done, would have known that the release in December made yesterday's announcement inevitable.
Exactly.
Unless the government came forward with a backstop themselves, the European Union wouldn't give one. So and this I suppose is more a question of you speculating, but I'd be interested to know what you think. Was she somehow duped, or is she now seeking to dupe the public? There's no way you could have signed up to what she signed up for in December without knowing that what happened yesterday was going to happen yesterday.
Well, if we remind ourselves, the artificial timeline Theresa May set herself was the concerns raised by the Conservative Party. And so all yesterday is, if you like, a write-out of the agreement reached in December between the UK and the European Union. And there are three options given there, which must have been agreed between David Davis and our government and the European Union. Now, here's why we should be even more worried. By the end of March, we're supposed to have agreed the terms for the transitional deal with the European Union. By the end of October, the final deal, because there needs to be time for this to be voted through the various EU institutions and our British Parliament. The idea that Theresa May and David Davis have a clue what's going on, know the destination they want, is ridiculous. And that's why people like John Major, people like Tony Blair are speaking out this week. Did you think John Major and Tony Blair want to make speeches and be poo-pooed by their own side? They're doing it because they've experienced as prime ministers negotiating with the European Union, and they're putting aside party politics for the interests of our country.
Well, and they would argue that they're doing their patriotic duty. They honestly believe that the country is visiting untold harm upon itself for spurious reasons, and they're standing up to stop it. Do you think the wheels could come off?
Yes.
Really?
Look, I think
more likely now than at any point since the vote, in your view?
What is quite clear, if anybody read the newspaper coverage this weekend, and we've got to assume at least half of it, for example, is accurate around the discussions at Chequers. Those discussions were motivated by Theresa May's keenness to keep the Conservative Party together, for her to keep her job rather than what's in the best interest of our country. You've got our Foreign Secretary comparing the Irish border between the borders between Camden, Islington and Westminster.
That's clever, though, isn't it? Because it's so absurd that it almost ducks criticism. If he'd said something that was actually wrong but plausible, he would be criticised in an intellectual way. When he says something that is so utterly bonkers, he kind of rises above constructive criticism, comparing the Northern Irish border to the congestion charge. So.
Well, the problem it creates is if you are the negotiator from the European Union, if you're seeking to enter into agreement with the UK, that's what you're dealing with, and that's why you said, could the wheels come off? If the EU think that we aren't serious and we've not got solutions to some of the challenges that everyone knew about, by the way, Tony Blair and John Major did a speech during the referendum campaign in Northern Ireland.
This was going to happen.
Exactly.
They did, but I don't know. Well, you know.
And so, look, by the way, if the wheels come off, put aside it's bad for Theresa May's career and the Conservative Party, it's bad for our country. That's why, I applaud John Major and Tony Blair coming on the pitch and expressing their views. It's really important they do so.
Let's have another call.
The next caller is Chris from Richmond. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Sadiq. So on the subject of Boris, given his fingerprints are all over the Golden Bridge, which we know has wasted over £40 million, do you agree with me that it's time for Boris Johnson to be asked to resign as a result?
Well, I don't want today's show to be just me giving a running commentary on Boris Johnson. He would love nothing more, by the way. The guy's an attention seeker, and he probably is chuffed that James O'Brien and I are talking about him, and you are, Chris. Look, my view is very simple. I think there are big questions around the Garden Bridge. From the day I became the mayor, there were questions that I was asking about the Garden Bridge. That's why I asked the former chair of the Public Accounts Committee to look into this whole saga. Before I became mayor, actually, whilst Boris was still mayor, questions were expressed in relation to procurement. Questions were expressed in relation to who got the contracts. If you remember, the original promise made by Boris Johnson was not a single penny of taxpayers' money would be spent on building this Garden Bridge. All the monies would come from private donors. Lo and behold, we know that already £37 million worth of taxpayers' money is being spent, but also there is a bill for a further £9 million they want the Department for Transport to pay for.
Well, we have been over this before. Today there's a development, isn't there? Does he have to attend this session of the GLA today? So
what's happened today, Chris, is the London Assembly has summoned Boris Johnson to attend the Assembly today to answer questions. He can't send somebody else like he did yesterday in Parliament. He's got to attend himself. And I think at 2 o'clock today, the Assembly, and this has nothing to do with me, it's the Assembly, will be asking him questions around the Garden Bridge. I've read newspaper reports today about people talking about misconduct in public office. I can't comment on that. I'm not an expert, but there are serious questions in relation to taxpayers' money being used on a project which had nothing to show for.
What powers does the Assembly have in this context? They'd refer to the police for investigation, would they? Some of the reports have suggested that.
Uncharted territory. I mean, what I've seen in the newspapers is there is a potential criminal offence that may have been committed. My understanding is there is no power of surcharge in relation to Boris Johnson, but there is an issue in relation to, obviously, Chris, I'm not sure if you're aware, but there are some monies not yet paid over to the Garden Bridge Trust and the companies, and there are obviously things that can be done to withhold that. But as far as Boris Johnson is concerned, it looks like he's got away with it.
You will be aware of another potential police investigation into a very generous donor to your friend Tom Watson and the Labour Party in general, Max Mosley, £540,000, found by a Daily Mail investigation stroke vendetta to have apparently published a racist pamphlet in the 1960s. Should Tom Watson give this money back?
Well, look, I mean, anybody who's seen the leaflet that's referred to is disgusting.
Should Tom Watson give the money back?
That's the issue for Tom.
Of course it is, but your opinion is an issue for you. Do you think Tom Watson should give the money back?
If I'd received this sort of money from this man and he's found guilty of perjury, then I think you should give it back.
If he's found guilty of perjury, not if he just simply...
I think we've got to be a bit careful here, because to be fair,
you're the lawyer.
To be fair, the allegation against Max Mosley is that he perjured himself under oath, and that's the allegation that's been put from the Daily Mail to the police, which they're investigating. So I think it'd be unfair for us to assume guilt, and let's wait and see how this takes its course.
Okay.
The next caller, thanks Chris for your call. The next caller is from Kingston on Thames. It's Matt. Good morning, Matt.
Hi there.
Hi, Matt.
Yes, my question to you, Sadiq, is I work for a homeless charity in Kingston upon Thames, Kingston Church's Action on Homelessness. I think it's great what you're doing, highlighting the housing crisis and the problems of homelessness in London. And we're responding to what you've called for, which is a severe weather emergency provision night shelter. But my question to you is, you're also promoting a Rough Sleeper Initiative Fund, and we're a grassroots organisation. We can't apply for funding to your fund because we don't work cross-borough. So how does a grassroots organisation actually get the money to fund night shelter, which you're asking for?
Well, Matt, firstly, thank you for your hard work on the shelter. I was visiting a shelter last night in Hammersmith, a SWEP in Hammersmith, and I want to thank everyone involved in this area of work, particularly the faith communities and your church as well for the work you're doing. Just to give people an idea of the numbers we're talking about, there were roughly speaking 8,000 people sleeping rough in one of the richest cities in the world, and that's why we've prioritised the issue of addressing rough sleeping. So, Matt, once we finish the show, get in touch with the LBC people. They'll put you in touch with City Hall, and anybody there who's providing facilities, contact City Hall. We've managed to...
So there's money available for people like Matt. If he may have gone down the wrong channels? Or?
No, Matt's right. There are basically, we're changing the previous regime. So, for example, Matt, you'll be aware, last year the rules were 3 days of successive 0 degrees before we'd open the shelters, the SWEPs. This year we've said if it approaches 0 degrees, even one day we open them up. But you're right, the criteria is cross-borough and Pan London. So what we're saying is, actually, we're going to micro-target some of this money. So, Matt, if your church needs the money, they will get the money. And one of the reasons we can do this, Matt, is because of the generosity of Londoners. Over the last few weeks, I think Londoners have donated more than £130,000 to the appeal that I've put out, working with 16 charities across London. So contact City Hall. We'll try and provide you with assistance. And we're going to try and make sure we improve next year even more the current system we have placed. I know, for example, Matt, and you'll know this, that across the night there were people in the NHS working their socks off, staying awake to help rough sleepers across our city.
Matt?
Yes.
Will you let me know if you're not satisfied with the response you get from City Hall?
I certainly will.
Thank
I really
you.
Appreciate that.
No,
thanks.
That's what we're here for.
Can I change? Well, James, can I say, we also set up and promoting an app called Street Link. And so if you're walking about our city and you see somebody sleeping rough, there's an app, and what that app does is it lets one of our outreach workers know where somebody's sleeping rough, and they can approach him or her and see if they need assistance. The bad news is some people won't take the offer of a shelter, but we want an outreach worker to approach them to see what assistance we can give them. So the app is Street Link, and get in touch with us if you see somebody sleeping rough.
If I ask you a question, answer it completely honestly. I'll tell you something that we've discovered in the last 24 hours, and I was shocked. I just want to know whether you're shocked or whether you knew this went on. We've been talking to someone who sleeps around the corner from this studio, someone who is actually in work, and someone who slept last night in a doorway. And when we asked him why he hadn't gone to the shelters that you have opened, the emergency shelters that are opened, he said he doesn't want to sleep scared, surrounded by junkies and people with all sorts of problems. So he is choosing to sleep in a doorway despite the provision of emergency shelter. Did you know that was a thing?
It is, James, and I was speaking to people last night who were at the SWEP. I visited the severe weather emergency provision. What we've done, James, and if you approach this person, we're now giving money to the SWEPs and the councils to, for example, provide B&Bs, because there are some people, not simply for the reasons you've alluded to, worried about personal safety. They could have complex mental health issues. They could have complex issues. Some people wrongly believe because they've got a dog, they won't be accepted in the shelters. What we're trying to do, James, is provide the funding to provide the help that people need, a bespoke overnight warm place to stay rather than a one-size-fits-all. It is the case, I don't mean to sound pejorative or unkind, that some of the people at the shelters have issues that lead to others being feeling vulnerable and feeling scared, and that's why I understand what the person said to you. But please contact the shelter. We've this year for the first time said to them they've got discretion and flexibility to provide facilities that meet the needs of the individual.
Just give me a little more detail on the dog situation? Because Street Vet has been in touch, and they say that sweat providers are variable in their inclusion of people with dogs. So that they add that the evidence is dogs help homeless people with their mental health issues. Can you just give us a little more detail?
Sure. So what we know, anybody who's walked around our city will see rough sleepers with a pet. Often, you're absolutely right, the pet is the best friend of the rough sleeper, helps with mental health issues, and is their best mate. They're not going to leave the pet out in the cold while they themselves get a nice warm bed. And the concern some rough sleepers have is their pet won't be allowed with them when they go to a SWEP. SWEP stands for Severe Weather Emergency Provision. We've made sure, and I checked this yesterday myself, that actually if somebody comes with a pet, they won't be with a dog, they won't be turned away as a consequence of their dog. So if you see somebody sleeping rough and they wrongly believe they won't be supported by shelter, please say they will be. And again, your advice is a good one. If people hear about cases, let us know in City Hall, and we will address that, because it can't be right that people aren't receiving a warm bed, shelter, because they've got a dog.
I'm not one of those people that bangs on about how much tax they pay, but I don't understand, given the amount of tax that is taken from us as workers. And I know not everybody cares about the vulnerable or the less fortunate, but we all pay tax. How can I be living in London in the 21st century with sub-zero temperatures on the streets and people sleeping in doorways?
I mean, firstly, you're right to be angry and be concerned and be frustrated. We are as well. I'm not excusing it, but there are a number of explanations. One is actually some people will decline the offer. I'm not suggesting that's the vast majority, but some people will decline the offer. Secondly, some councils have been inflexible in relation to taking people who need help because there's no connection with a borough. The way to think about it is, and it beggars belief, that we're divided into 33 parts, our city is, and each borough has a duty and a responsibility, and some boroughs are good, some boroughs are less bad. And the third thing is, historically there's been not enough outreach workers to go and find people in doorways. Most people who are sleeping rough for a long period of time know the warm places to stay out, less cold places to stay out, or the place where they're less likely to be the victim of violence, the corridor to sleep in, and so they won't be seen by you and me. But skilled outreach workers will find them and give them the assistance they need. But just to underscore your point, roughly speaking, 8,000 rough sleepers in our city. If we're lucky, 1,000, 2,000 will have found somewhere warm to sleep last night. That's still 6,000, 7,000 sleeping out in sub-zero temperatures in the fifth richest city in the world.
And you mentioned safe spaces or warm spots that people know. Rachel Venables was out with the homeless charity Night Watch a couple of nights ago, and they encountered a middle-aged homeless woman called Jo. Just have a listen to this.
I was in the corridor of Kew car park, and 3 police officers kicked me out and told me that people pay a lot of money to live in them flats, and they don't really want people like just dossing in the corridor. All I said to them is that it's freezing out there, so they must be nice people. And that was it. I just got up and left. But it just seems like whenever I find places like that, I do get kicked out. But it's too cold at the moment.
It's the 19th century, Sadiq Khan.
Yeah, I heard about this report yesterday. It's not acceptable. Police officers need to exercise common sense. Joe's story, I'm afraid, is not unique in relation to landowners. People who think that rough sleepers bring down the character of the area and should be moved on. We contacted Croydon as a consequence of Rachel Venables' excellent report, and we're making sure that nobody else is falling through the cracks. But, police officers shouldn't be telling people to move on when it's -3, -5, -10 degrees. And what I'd say to fellow Londoners is, look, for goodness sake, it's so cold. Don't ring the police. Don't shoo people on when they're in your front doorway in this sort of weather. Please contact StreetLink so we can get an outreach worker there.
How do we do that? How do we contact StreetLink? Via this app?
It's an app, yes.
Okay, so you download the app.
I tell you why the app's the best thing to do, James, because it finds the postcode and finds the individual person, and we can then give you a report what happened. Because what you want is peace. You want to know that person I reported, what happened to that person. And the advantage of the app is it's much better than a phone line, because we don't want people ringing a phone line and then not getting a call. So the app is just called StreetLink, and we'll get somebody, an outreach worker there, to try and help people like Joe who need help rather than being shooed on.
It is, of course, at the shallow end, if you like, of weather-related concerns compared to the plight of someone like Joe. But Paddington has had to shut today because the snow is blowing into the station. I appreciate that we are not an Arctic nation, so we don't have the infrastructure or the hardware in place to deal with weather like this as a matter of course. What are you doing, though?
So it's Transport for London are in charge of the buses, the tubes, the trams and London Overground. The good news is, in relation to the roads, the roads we're in charge of, they're all being gritted, and hopefully anybody who's used the main roads will see how gritted they are. The tubes are running well. During the course of the night, we've suspended engineering works, and it sounds a bit techie, but we're greasing the lines and making sure the de-icing takes place in those lines where they're outside and inside as well. The trams are working pretty well. London Overground, my frustration with London Overground is some of the lines are run by Network Rail, and they've not been as sensible as they should be. The good news is we've put pressure on Network Rail, and so there's been an improvement on the overground system. But, I'm actually reasonably pleased with Transport for London services. We need to make sure, though, that the Network Rail also provide a good service as well. I put the context, which you sort of alluded to, which is this. Look, in any year, there'll be a very small number of days where the weather is this bad. Often it takes a number of years before the weather gets this bad. So I understand why Network Rail and others don't invest in huge sums of money in equipment and stuff that you'd see in Canada and Scandinavia countries. But it can't be beyond the wit of us to make sure we grease lines, we put gritter out, we make sure that we have de-icing taking place.
Actually, take another. Let's squeeze in another.
The next call is from, I think it's Hendon. It's James from Hendon. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Sadiq. Good morning, James. Thanks for taking my call. I run a small family business based in Barking and Dagenham where we manufacture items for the construction trade, and we have to drive vans into the North and South Circular, or within the North and South Circular, every day to make deliveries. And with the current consultation extending the ultra-low emission zone to the North and South Circulars, is there going to be some sort of relief for small businesses if we're going to be driving into the zone?
Thanks, James. Thanks for your question. So what we're consulting, for those listeners that aren't aware of this, is a new ultra-low emission zone. So the plan is for next year, in 2019, for just the congestion charge area for it to apply to. And that means basically if your vehicle is very old and a polluter, if you enter the congestion charge area, you have to pay an additional cost. And the idea is to encourage you to not drive into central London if your vehicle is a polluter and to move towards a cleaner vehicle. And what you're alluding to, James, is the consultation we're doing in relation to what happens in the early 2020s, in 2021, to extend it up to the North and South Circular. And so let's wait and see what the consultation says. But in the meantime, James, what I'm doing is lobbying the government for exactly what you say, for a diesel scrappage scheme. And the idea would be, James, is to help small businesses, charities and families on low incomes to move away from polluting vehicles to cleaner vehicles. And we've submitted a business case to the government. And so the idea would be is if you've got a van, you get a few £1,000s. If you've got a car, you get less sum of money to move away from diesel, old forms of petrol to newer ones. And that's the reason why, James, we aren't doing it overnight, because we're giving fleets like yours time when it comes to when you buy new vehicles, give you time to build in if you're buying a new vehicle, that actually you should think about buying a cleaner vehicle rather than continue to buy older vehicles. That's why we've not done it overnight. I'm being criticised for some people for not moving quick enough, but I think I've got to be sensible and allow businesses like you time to move from the older polluting vehicles to cleaner vehicles. Does that make sense?
It does. It's just that we're stuck with diesel vehicles for vans. There aren't cleaner vehicles on the market for these kind of vehicles.
Yeah, that's why we're not doing it overnight. So the earliest it will come in, James, for the up to the North and South Circular is 2021. In the meantime, we're lobbying the government for the diesel scrappage scheme, and we are working with manufacturers in relation to improving the vehicles. So some diesels are much cleaner. So the rules now is we're consulting on is what's called Euro 6. So basically, if the diesel is 2015 or newer, this is very roughly speaking, if it's 2015 or newer diesel, it's basically Euro 6, so you'd be okay. Does that answer your question?
I checked one of our vehicles, which is 2017, and it has to add blue emissions that you have to add to that. It's Euro 6, and it's still saying that we'd have to pay the extra charge.
Well, I can't go into details now, but if it's Euro 6, you won't have to pay the charge. But that's what we're consulting on now, James.
Right. Okay.
Double check. Come back next time. Sadiq Khan is here, and we'll get to the bottom of it.
But James, the reason your question is the reason why we've set up this website, which and I'm glad you've used it. But if you're Euro 6 diesel, you should be okay. But let me go away and check whether there are some exemptions to that. What we don't want to do is give the impression that all diesel is bad and all petrol is good. Not the case.
And I want to be kept in this loop, James, as well, because I know it isn't a cop-out, but it can sound like one when the mayor just sort of refers you to his people. So we'll keep a close eye on that. Were you aware prior to the Finsbury Park terror trial that the now convicted murderer Darren Osborne wanted to kill you and Jeremy Corbyn?
I was told about it the day after the incident.
You were?
Yeah.
How do you process information like that?
I mean, it's not nice. I mean, it's not nice. I mean, the thing about terrorists, though, look, terrorists want to harm, injure, kill people randomly. There probably are terrorists planning to, cause destruction to our city as we speak now. God forbid you and your family could be the victims, me and my family could be the victims. Clearly it's when people, hate you individually rather than, you as one of the population of London, it's not a great feeling.
Do you talk it over with the family?
Yeah, I mean, I've got young girls. I know. I've got a mum and stuff, and so you got to mention it in a sensitive way. The key thing is for us to be responsible, and for us to realise that we live in a great city. The police look after us, and I'm not going to allow someone like Darren Osborne or people who of his ilk to stop me leading my life. I'm not going to do that.
Can I just have a little listen to Mark Rowley, the Assistant Commissioner, talking about extreme right-wing attack plots? This will be the last line of questioning.
We have a homegrown neo-Nazi white supremacist organisation with terrorist purposes operating here. They're also starting to make connections internationally. That's a matter of real concern, and whilst it may be the smaller part of the threat, it's significant, and I don't think it gets the profile it deserves as part of the problems that we've all got to collectively wrestle with.
Why do you think it doesn't spook the population quite as much as Islamist terrorism does? Leaving aside the obvious question of numbers, or the number of casualties and deaths undertaken or committed by Islamist terrorists and murderers is greater, but when an assistant commissioner warns of a growing threat like this, there's a sense abroad, there's a sense among the British public that it's somehow taken less seriously. I
mean, I think the frustration that Mark Rowley has, and by the way, we should thank Mark Rowley for his long service doing the work that he's done and wish him well in his retirement. The frustration Mark has is that there seems to be a complacency by all of us about the threat from this sort of extremism. What you are seeing, by the way, is like a mirror image of the radicalisation of those on the extreme right, as we saw with those, inverted commas, Islamists or Daesh-inspired, Al-Qaeda-inspired, and nobody's talking about it. And that's the point that Mark Rowley is trying to make. And also, when you look at the referrals to Prevent or to Channel, which are the organisations that help deal with people who are being radicalised, a significant number are now from the far right, the extreme right. But also, if you looked at the particular case that is in the public domain that we can talk about, of Darren Osborne, you see the acceleration of him being radicalised and what radicalised him. It's very similar to what we see with Islamists and Al-Qaeda-inspired terrorists, and we've got to talk about it, and we can't pretend it's not happening. Of course, the numbers, thankfully, aren't as big as they are with the Islamist, Al-Qaeda-inspired terrorists, but it's something we've got to talk about and we've got to address. And that means, by the way, taking on some of the myths that exist. In both extremes, the myth that exists that says you can't be a Westerner and a Muslim, it's it's mutually exclusive to be British and to be a Muslim. Somehow we're the cause, I speak as a Muslim, of all the problems that there are in this country and in the West. And we've got to. And by the way, those same views exist by some of these charismatic preachers of hate.
This is slightly because you are something of an emblem of these problems, aren't you? Some of the hatred you receive, we'll see it on our Twitter account today after we've put it out there. And yet, at the same time, these people often insist that Muslims should do more to integrate. It's occurred to me in the past, you can't get much more integrated than getting elected Mayor of London, but it seems they're still not happy.
I'm a proud Londoner, born and raised in this city. I'm also somebody who tries to practice being a decent Muslim, and I love the job that I do. And I think the point people make to me, mums and dads, uncles and aunties of Asian origin or Islamic faith, is if somebody like you, who's for all intent and purposes integrated and as British as they come, isn't accepted, then who the hell is? And that's why...
But that's the elephant in the room, isn't it? With a lot of this rhetoric about integration, it masks the fact that they don't think someone like you ever can really be British or belong.
But all I'd say is when people are propagating those views, have in the back of your pocket the fact that, you know, somebody like me got the biggest electoral mandate of any politician in the history of our country. So we should be proud of the fact that our city, thinks is a positive, that our city voted for someone like me to be mayor. And that's why you made the point about my family. I don't feel comfortable talking about my family, but you know, don't let it get you down. And all I say is, you know, I don't talk about my experiences of racism or Islamophobia or the challenges that I face, because I don't want a young person to think, you know what, I don't want to be a mayor, I don't want to be a politician, I don't want to put my head above the parapet, or mum, dad, to discourage son, daughter, nephew, niece from, you know, entering public life. And you know, for every person who, you know, does a horrible tweet or is a troll, there are so many more thoroughly decent people in our city.
Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, many thanks indeed. I've got 2 or 3 things jotted down that we shall keep an eye on and make sure that there is movement. I'm thinking of the construction supply firm, I'm thinking of the homeless charity in Kingston, and 1 or 2 other things as well. But before you go, what are all these bikes about? These new bikes that are popping up all over the place?
So what it is, so people have seen the Santander cycles, which of the docking stations,
otherwise known as Boris bikes, for people confused, perhaps.
Some would say Sadiq cycles, but hey,
I think just you.
So what we're doing is, so in Outer London in particular, we want to encourage people to be able to rent bikes, and so we're trying to have dockless schemes in place, but they've got to be done in a sensible way. We don't want bikes suddenly left lying around because they've been done improperly. So if a local authority wants to have cycle hire schemes and they don't want to contribute towards the Santander scheme, we encourage them to enter into agreements with these dockless bicycle companies. And so we're trying to encourage more people to, you know, walk, cycle, use public transport, and the dockless cycle hires scheme is one way of doing so.
Quick word from John Nichol, who you'll remember was a former prisoner of war during the first Gulf War. He's listening, as he often does. I do like listening to Sadiq Khan on LBC. I don't always agree, but he makes compelling arguments. I'm not entirely sure he is in as full agreement with Mr. Corbyn as he says. But hey,
John, we've run out of time. It's funny you say that.
We'll leave that one hanging. It's 10:40. Simon Conway has the headlines.
A red weather warning for snow and ice has been issued by the Met Office. It covers the southwest of England and South Wales, with the expected arrival of Storm Emma. The highest level alert is in place from 3 this afternoon until 2 a.m.